one of the problems in game design that I've heard you talk a lot about is the inherent challenge of interactivity, and the fact that so one way of looking at this, I guess, is the longer you play a game, the more decisions that the player has made has branched outwards and produced just an unmanageable amount of potential paths for a designer to contemplate. So if you're wanting to have a curated experience, you either have to limit the interactivity, which makes it less of a game, or you limit the artistic expression. And so it feels like as an artist working with an interactive medium, there's this inherent tension.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. Like what you just said there at the end, I don't agree with.
Okay.
There are certain modes of artistic expression, like storytelling, for which this is true. But there's like part of what's interesting about working in games right now is we are still finding new kinds of artistic expression that people didn't have before. And like those don't necessarily become weakened with the increase in interactivity. In fact, they can become strengthened. And so the problem is just when people do too much pretending like they're in movies or pretending like they're writing a novel, but this is a game. And that produces this kind of problem. But if you're more like, I'm creating moods and settings, or one of the things we do in the games that we're working on right now that's probably hard to explain to people, but we're working on a puzzle game where you set up the elements and it's a puzzle that you try and solve, but in doing so, you observe and gain an appreciation for the way things were set up, and that is expressive. In a different, it's kind of like poetry almost, where you appreciate the, certain aspects of the sound and texture of what you're reading. It's like that, but actually pretty different too. And so that's hard. It's harder to discover that kind of thing than it is to just write a story like it's a movie. And so, and also a lot of people in the games industry are making a huge amount of money from writing stories like they're movies and shoving them into a game. But
yes,
but that doesn't make it like, high art, right?
It's a bit like chess boxing, isn't it? The way some games operate. It's like just two different experiences that alternate.
I only learned about chess boxing a couple of weeks ago, and it seems absurd. But
in a way, it's the same type of experiential design that we've been using in, cutscene followed by first person shooter followed by cutscene is quite similar as a form of entertainment. But we've been limited in as game designers in having to, I guess, pre-bake all of the interactions for the player, and that you can set up the boundaries of play, but you can't make artistic decisions on the fly. I've been wondering recently whether there's the possibility of building AI that can have an artistic steer. So to use the text to image AI as a kind of example, suppose you wanted to have let's just, to make it simple, let's assume you just want an image of an NPC that you've run into. You can now theoretically set up a bunch of keywords as the game designer that you never reveal, but that's your input. You then let the player make some decisions and they add keywords, and what comes out is the product of these in a way that wasn't previously possible without the neural networks and the deep learning and so on. That's a very surface level version of this. You could imagine it producing geometry, making shaders. It could design the layout of a city so that the path you take through it is based on the path you took through a city 4 hours ago. So are we going to see a new type of game design where the experience is much less tightly controlled, but much more reactive to the player. Is this an exciting new world of games?
I'm not sure, right? And to explain why, I'll dial back, let's say 15 to 20 years. If you went to games industry conferences, games were still getting more impressive in terms of graphics very quickly. Today, game graphics get a little bit better over time, but it's a very slow advancement, right? But, graphics were getting better rapidly. Physics was getting better rapidly. GPUs were starting to be used widely. And so you were getting a big jump from that. And so there was all this discussion about like, oh, or certain people would talk about it like, we're going to reach this holy grail of simulating reality, right? And my friend Frank Lance actually gave a speech at one of these conferences. It was a short speech, like 5 minutes. But he basically shot down this idea because the job of a game is not really to simulate reality. It's to give you an experience that is not reality. And the way that it is different from reality is what makes it valuable as a game, right? Like, and this is true of all human modes of expression. So one of the analogies he used is that the reason language is valuable is that it's different from the thing, right? And that's why in hunter-gatherer days, your friend could shout, "Watch out, there's a bear," and that's useful, right? The word bear would not be better if it had teeth and could kill you, because then if your friend shouts, "Watch out, there's a bear," you would die.
Spawned another one.
Right? Yes. So,
Yeah.
so that, in chess, you're not actually murdering a bunch of foot soldiers, and that's good, right? And so to bring that forward to today, we already have some games that have tried this thing a little bit. Like in the early days of, I think it might have even been GPT-2 or something. There was this like AI dungeon thing that was kind of a game. And it's like, it's not a game. It's just, you're kind of free-formly inputting and some output is coming. And, it like, the fact that you can tell very quickly that it's like not really a game removes a lot of the value to me as a game. Now it might have value as something else, right? Something somewhere else on the map of what people do. But I don't see that as an evolution of games exactly. And so now there may be, the examples you started with about like generating an image based on a mixture of inputs or something is kind of a constrained version of this, and it might be that people find useful constraints of how to make something happen that's like still a game but also has this, but it's not obvious to me what's good there. But I do think it's inevitable that you start to see some of this stuff get used.
You could imagine, I don't know, suppose you early levels you're playing as a child and you do a crayon drawing. Later levels, you discover that your house is based on the scribbles that you did as a child. You could use it in artistic ways that has some. It's I guess it's another tool in the toolbox.
Like generating geometry for a house that is navigable and complies with all the constraints, and then like it's well designed. So like, again, I'm being a little bit silly here, but like I'm shooting at a dude and I try to duck around the corner and now I get caught on this like thing because it wasn't like when people design shooter levels, they like streamline them in certain ways so that you don't have these bad play experiences. Right. And like, okay, you could maybe somehow train an AI to do all that, but it's not easy, man.
No, but in some ways that is the bit of it that seems to be emerging, is that all the things that we thought humans were going to forever be unique in our abilities to do.
I don't like that whole line of thing.
Okay.
Not that it's true or false. I just don't think about things that way in terms of like, the magic of being a person. Like, there is a magic of being a human, but I think it's been misdiagnosed by most people most of the time. And so it's just very, I don't know. Well,
I guess there is a sense in which when you're participating in an artistic experience, a piece of what's happening is that you're having a human-to-human encounter. The person who made the game has a life that is, has an inner life that's similar to yours, the human experience. And when you see that they've made a corridor in a certain way, maybe that tells you something about
maybe
them as a human.
Maybe, but like, as soon as you have AI well enough that it could talk to you like a person, people will just believe that it has a subjective experience. It doesn't even matter if it does or not, which I think that whole way of thinking about things is like not the right framing, which is why it doesn't make any sense to try to come up with answers there. But nevertheless, it doesn't matter, because people, if you have a robot that could just walk around and act like a person, people will treat it like a person. But
if somebody wrote something using GPT-3 that was this existential text, and I read it and felt understood, like, wow, this is philosophically interesting to me, and then I learned that it had been written by an AI, that does substantially change how I feel about the text.
Well, okay, but I think that's, again, because the way that we're generating this text right now, like I said, it doesn't, like, it knows what it's writing, but it also doesn't know what it's writing, in such a way that what comes out is kind of a gimmick in a certain way, right? This doesn't have to do with fundamentally whether it was written by a robot or a human being. If you had a robot who was as good at thinking as a human being, would you feel that way about it? I don't know. Maybe that's something where people just will disagree on an individual basis, but I don't think, like, I certainly would feel like I had one put over on me if I discovered that. But that's because of the nature of the current process that generates these texts. I don't think it's inherent in it being machine generated. Like, here's the thing, all right? So on the one hand, we're conscious human beings who walk around and have living experiences and so forth. On the other hand, when you're talking to somebody, like I'm doing right now, right? I'm saying these sentences in this video. Where do the words come from? Like, am I consciously choosing every single word? No. Like, I feel like I am. And we do have conscious processes where we stop and deliberate about what we're going to think sometimes, but we don't usually do that. Usually the words just come out, right? And they happen to be in accordance with what I believe I was wanting to say at the time. If that weren't true, we wouldn't be able to speak fluidly. It would take way too long to, like, make words. And so if this is something that anyone with even a little bit of meditation experience can do, is you look at what's your actual conscious experience, right, versus these other things that we intellectually think about ourselves as human beings. And, like, okay, if I think and I'm choosing what I say, why can't I see that? Why am I not conscious of that process? Well, I don't know. It happens somewhere unconsciously. And so there's two things about that. A, you don't know what that process is by which those words come out. They just show up, and then you observe them showing up out of your mouth, right? And B, therefore, it doesn't necessarily have that much to do with the experience of being human at some level, because you don't know most of that experience. The words are just there, right? And so feeling differently about words generated by a computer is strange, because you don't really know, like, your words that you are saying came from outside of you in some sense, in that you don't have introspective capability to it. You're just, your brain is kind of programmed to accept them and feel good about them as belonging. It's like your immune system is not rejecting this experience of these words coming out, but where do they come from? It's actually, it's a very, very basic thing that almost, like, we all just ignore all the time, right?
Right.
But the point being, Do I have much reason to believe that words generated by a computer are that much different from words generated by me? No, I don't.